Hello and welcome. I'm Liz Cheng, General Manager of WGBH. Thanks so much for coming today. Did everyone enjoy the film? I just want to say thank you to you both for letting us into your life together. And we know how difficult this can be because it was 4 years, 120 hours of shooting down to 90 minutes. So it's amazing. Your personal voyage has been just incredible, from a Japanese internment camp.
Japanese American.
Japanese in Arkansas, Star Trek and other major films and television shows, to hiding your sexual orientation for decades. As Brad says, most actors with a resume like yours, they're in the back nine of their career. They start relaxing and they start enjoying the fruits of their labor. Not George and not Brad. They've been campaigning for gay marriage. They both campaigned for reparations for those who were interned in Japanese American camps. George has written a musical play about his experiences in the internment camp. And now he is a Facebook star. I feel exhausted. So, knowing that many of you are Asian American, I thought my first question should be about being Asian American. I have to say that as a daughter of immigrant parents, if I had gone home and asked my parents if I could be an actor, I can tell you that I would be out on the street, they would have disowned me. So to start off, George, I mean, your parents must have been so unusual back then to say, yeah, try being an actor, be supportive. You don't have to be a doctor, you don't have to be a lawyer, you don't have to be an architect. How did that happen?
Well, actually, they weren't initially that supportive at all. They thought it was good to be interested in the arts, the theater. That's, part of culture, being a cultured person. But you don't make a living at that. And my father guided me into thinking that I wanted to be an architect. He'd take me out on Sunday excursions to construction sites where luxury hotels were going up, where the cultural center was going up. And so I got the message, and I started my college career as an architecture student at Berkeley. But after 2 years, I just couldn't see myself as an architect, committing my life to it. So I came back down from Berkeley to Los Angeles to have a very serious discussion with my father about my future. And I told him that I wanted to be an actor. And he knew that he had a hand for his son, so he knew that this discussion would be coming up eventually. I said I want to go to the Actors Studio in New York and study there, because that's where all the great ones come from. Marlon Brando, James Dean, Montgomery Clift. And I started to launch into my sales pitch. My father said, I knew this discussion would be coming up. And I know about the Actors Studio. It's a respected acting school, but they won't give you a diploma when you finish there that says you're legitimately educated. And your mother and I want you to have that. So if you must study theater and acting, right here in town in Los Angeles, we have UCLA that has a fine theater arts department. And if you study there and you finish, then they'll give you that diploma. So we would rather see you go there. But you're a bullheaded kid. You're going to insist on going to New York. So let me remind you, New York is an expensive place, crowded place, and a competitive place. And you have to be prepared to do it all on your own. However, if you go to UCLA, we will subsidize you. I had to decide, and I discovered I'm a practical kid. I went with the subsidy.
Your father was obviously a genius. You describe in the film living in an internment camp and just the very brutal way in which your family was transported from California to Arkansas. Looking back, how do you think that experience, because up until that point your life was fairly idyllic, and how do you think that experience changed you, your parents, and your relationship to your parents?
It was completely life-changing. You say the life before was idyllic, but I was too young to really understand what was happening. I just turned 5 years old, and it was a few weeks after my 5th birthday. And that morning is the morning I'll never forget. My parents got me up very early together with my brother, a year younger, and my baby sister, and dressed us hurriedly, and my brother and I were in the living room looking out the front window, and we saw 2 soldiers marching up our driveway with rifles on their shoulders, with bayonets shining in the sun. They stomped at the front porch and banged on the front door. My father answered it, and literally at gunpoint, they ordered us out of our home. My father gave us, my brother and me, little pieces of luggage to carry, and we were out on the driveway waiting for my mother to come out. She took a long time, and when she finally emerged, she had our baby sister in one arm and a huge duffel bag in the other, and tears were streaming down both her cheeks. It was a terrorizing morning, and that's a morning I'll never forget. But going to Arkansas as a child, and my father told us that we were going for a long vacation to a place called Arkansas. It sounded exotic to me.
It is.
To a 5-year-old kid, I'd never heard of Arkansas. And when we got there, it was very swampy, bayous, with pools of water, and the cypress roots snaking in and out of the water. I'd never seen anything like that. It was a very strange place. And then the train came up to right beside the barbed wire fences, and I saw the barbs on it, and I saw soldiers with rifles, again, all over the place. And I'll never forget those barbed wire fences. Once we got into camp and got settled in our barracks, there was a sentry tower right near my barrack. At night, when I made the night runs to the latrine, searchlights followed me. But 5-year-old me, I thought it was kind of nice that they lit the way for me to pee. So the thing about children is they're amazingly adaptable. What would be grotesquely abnormal became my normality. It became normal for me to line up 3 times a day to eat lousy food in a noisy mess hall. It became normal for me to go with my father and take a mass shower with others. And I started school, and it became normal for me to start every school day with a Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I could see the barbed wire fence and the sentry towers right outside my schoolhouse window as I recited the words, "With liberty and justice for all." An innocent child, just mouthing words that the teacher taught me. So my actual memories in the camp itself are fun memories, adventures, catching pollywogs in the creek and putting them in a pickle jar and watching them sprout legs, and magically their tails would fall off and they would become frogs.
Well, as you mentioned in the film that when you had finally left, everyone felt that they were leaving home because it had become your home. But once you left, and certainly going through the whole, signing the allegiance agreement and all, or not signing the allegiance agreement, did you find that
Loyalty questionnaire.
Did you find that you once you left and you were back in California, did you wanted to embrace your sense of being Japanese American more, or did you want to accentuate more about being American again? I mean, did you feel any resentment towards the country, or did you feel that, you know, that's what happened and now I need to move on?
Well, as I said, we adjusted to our incarceration behind those barbed wire fences. For us, the kids, and by this time I was 9 years old, coming home back to Los Angeles, being released, was the most traumatic part of it all, because we were literally penniless. They'd taken everything from us. You know, my father's business, our home, our freedom, bank accounts were all frozen and taken away. We didn't have a cent. And we came back to a city that was still hostile toward us. Our first home was on Skid Row, and that to us was terrifying. You know, with derelicts and lunatics and drunkards staggering around all over, the stench of urine everywhere. My father's first job was as a dishwasher in a Chinatown restaurant. Only other Asians would hire us. And I started school, and the teacher kept calling me the Jap boy, which stung. What had I done to this old lady for her to be calling me names? But I knew that my parents by that time had suffered a lot, and I kept that to myself. When I came home, I didn't tell my parents that the teacher was calling me a Jap. So coming home was the worst part of the internment experience. It took a long time, and I felt ashamed that I was Japanese, that I had this face, and very alone, because from Skid Row we moved into an all Mexican-American barrio in LA, East LA. My father found a dry cleaning shop with an apartment behind it. And again, we were the only Asian people in this all Mexican-American neighborhood. But then, you know, they were wonderful people. And my mother made good friends with our neighbor, Mrs. Gonzalez, and they traded recipes. And to me, the best enchiladas and tacos were made by Mrs. Takei, my mother.
Really multicultural. And how satisfying must it have been when you finally got the reparations for those people who survived this terrible experience?
It did not come easily. It took long years of advocacy, lobby, campaigning. Congress set up a congressional commission, and I testified at it with my childhood memories. And finally, in 1988, many, many decades after the internment, and my father had passed by that time. He passed in 1979, and he was one that suffered the pain of the internment the most. But in 1988, the Civil Liberties Act was passed. President Ronald Reagan signed it, and he formally, on behalf of the United States, apologized for that unconstitutional incarceration and pledged a $20,000 token redress for the pain and suffering. My mother was and you had to be alive at the time of the signing of the bill. And my mother got her $20,000 redress, but as my father's widow, she did not get his share because he had passed. He wasn't alive at the time of the signing. When I got my $20,000 check, I felt that I was too young to really understand or feel the pain of the internment. So I gave the whole check to the Japanese American National Museum, which tells the story of that experience.
It's amazing that you did that. We have some questions from our audience. This is from Eileen from Quappa. And this has to do, actually, you know, both of you. Did you ever tell your parents that, you know, I have, you know, someone that I'm in love with that I would marry if I could? Or was this something that you never really had to share with your parents?
My father had passed by that time. My mother knew Brad as my friend. But when I came out to her, it was something difficult for her to get her head around. But the thing that made it not as difficult was she wasn't dealing with a stereotyped idea of a gay person. She knew Brad, so it was specific. And she knew him, she thought she knew him as my friend and not as my partner. She thought he was my roommate. In the way that mothers like to think of their sons' roommates.
Exactly. But then she came to live with you, and we were talking a little bit beforehand how difficult that must have been. She had Alzheimer's, and that, probably she started to speak less and less English. I mean, that's at least my experience has been with people who are immigrants. They start to speak less.
Well, my mother was born in this country.
Oh, she was? Okay.
She was born in Sacramento.
Okay.
My grandfather was farming there.
Okay, so he was...
My father was born in Japan, but he was brought over as a kid, a small boy, and he grew up in San Francisco. And he thought like an American because he was educated and reared here or in San Francisco. But as my mother grew, because she lived in a farming community, mostly Japanese immigrant farmers there, her language was Japanese.
Was Japanese.
Yeah. Her English was accented. What was it, about almost 10 years after she knew we were together, Alzheimer's started to attack her. And she could not take care of herself. So I asked Brad if I could move my mother in with us, and Brad agreed. And it's a horrible disease that goes in stages, and each stage is horrible, and worse as it gets. And Brad was a pillar of support. I owe so much to him for having, he was more of a son to her than my brother. In fact, another painful part of living with an Alzheimer person, my brother would come to visit. He was always busy, he'd be visiting and he'd be looking at his watch. I gotta go, I've got an appointment. And he left, and on this particular visit, she said, "Who was that?" Her own son. But she remembered who Brad was.
Because Brad was there every day.
Every day, every day. He was he was a saint.
We know back in Hollywood that it was not an easy time to be a closeted gay person. Can you dimension a little bit for us what that was like? Were you constantly in fear of being discovered, and especially when you both started to live together?
The social climate was totally different back then. And when I started my acting career back in the 1950s, I would not have a career if I were known to have been gay. And so you live a closeted, not so closeted. You have your guard up all the time. When you go to parties or screenings where the press might be, you go with a female friend and you put up a facade. But then later on that evening, I might be at a gay bar, and you're always worried somebody might recognize you and go to the press. So you're on pins and needles all the time. You're always afraid of someone exposing you or treachery by some friend. It's a horrible, tense, exhausting, enervating way to live. And yet, you know, once you get a series, you know, you're working weekly, and at the end of each week, we have our wrap party. The beer is rolled out and the pizza is brought in, and people invite their wives or their husbands or their girlfriends or boyfriends, and more often than not, I'm bringing a buddy along. And, you know, my fellow actors are very sophisticated people, but they're also cool people. And they, you know, oh, I get it, George. But they know that it can be destructive if they talk to other people about me. So they were cool about it. They knew.
Does that include your Star Trek cast?
My Star Trek cast, except for one. Went right over his head. He never knew until I actually came out.
You invited him to the wedding.
We did. We did. Despite his protest. And, you know, if he wanted to come, he should have called us. Maybe there might have been a mistake. We did send him an invitation, but he never responded, and it's typical of Bill. But then, 2 months after the wedding, he goes on YouTube and rants and raves about George not inviting him to our wedding. We were absolutely baffled. I mean, we did send him an invitation, but if he wanted to come, he should have called or said something before the wedding, not 2 months after the fact. It's too late, you know. And then, you know, he starts psychoanalyzing me. He thinks he's made the statement, you know, George is suffering from some psychosis. But then...
he was just mad that he was the only one who didn't know.
Well, now he says, I really don't know George. I mean, we did 3 seasons of a TV series together. We did 6 movies together. I just saw him yesterday, as a matter of fact, at the Comic-Con there in Providence. You know, we do conventions all over. And he still says he doesn't know me. Well, if he doesn't know me, how can he psychoanalyze me? And if he doesn't know me, why would he complain about not coming to our wedding? You know, it's really crazy. But the way I tell people now, we have our Star Trek family. You saw him in the documentary. The surviving members of the Star Trek family all came together, as did Bill. And so we are a family. But like many families, you know, we all have our crazy, eccentric uncle. We have our Uncle Bill.
We all know there's a little dysfunction in all our families. Well, you describe it seems like something among the acting community where they understand people's differences and they accept that. In a way, it seems as if on film, things might not have changed as much. I mean, if you had knew a young actor today, Asian American who was gay, a gay man, what would you tell them? Would you tell them, go ahead and go out and, you know, come on out of the closet and, you know, hope that you can still get those, you know, love interest films? Or would you say, you know, wait until you have a body of work?
Well, I think society has changed dramatically. I mean, just last week, the CEO of the #1 corporation in America, Apple Corporation, Tim Cook, the CEO, comes out as gay and says he's proud and he considers being gay a wonderful gift from God. It's a changed society. And people like him, I think, help give people the confidence in themselves. The world has changed. We have 32 states now that have marriage equality. So the ones that don't have marriage equality in the minority. But as I did in the internment camps, when I pledge allegiance to the flag, I pledge allegiance to the United States of America. And I know that we will have equality in the United States of America before too long. So to a young Asian American actor, I say, look at the world. And that is your gift. And you can contribute a special quality to whatever roles you take on. As a matter of fact, after I came out, I got more guest shots playing George Takei, gay guy, in Big Bang Theory. They cast me as George Takei in my uniform, and Howard was having some identity difficulties, and he was imagining things, and his girlfriend appears in his imagination, and they're talking about his ambiguity about his imagination, and then I appear, and they ask him, do you think you might be gay? And he says, I don't think so. And I say, so you say, but here I am.
Exactly. By the same token, I know that in the film you said that you took some roles that you wish you had not, most particularly Jerry Lewis. So if you were counseling that same Asian American young man, what would you say to them when a plum role comes along in a big film, and it might be a portrayal that they might not really want to do? How would you advise that person?
Let me put that in context, the Jerry Lewis. I didn't want to do it. My agent then was a Japanese American, and he's the one that brought the role, the offer to me. And I said, Fred, this is what I don't want to do. This is what we're fighting against. But he said, George, you're on an ascendant career path. And to keep it going, you need a big box office hit. That helps an actor build his career. This is back then, back in the early 60s. This will help you build a career. And Jerry Lewis is the biggest box office at this time. You've got to do it. And he twisted my arm, and I let him do that. And I took that role. And I still regret it to this day. But nowadays, roles like that don't exist, first of all. Now we have Asian Americans playing leads in series. John Cho is the lead in a new TV series called Selfie. Every TV series that's localed in a major metropolitan area, Boston, New York, San Francisco, Chicago, LA, has an Asian American in it. So I don't think a young actor, Asian American actor, will be presented with that kind of situation. I don't think those stereotype roles can make it past the early stages of studio vetting.
Exactly. Brad, this is a question for you. I noticed in the film at one point you were...
is this a question from somebody in the audience, or is it your question?
This is my question. I noticed in the film when George is being introduced or interviewed by Howard Stern, you were sort of chiding him for becoming a little bit too specific about your home life and all of the above. Did you, at any point during this film, did you sort of say to George, you know what, maybe this is not a good idea?
Do we need a sound check? I'm okay. The reason I'm thrilled with the 93-minute documentary that you all just saw by female director Jennifer M. Crute is because George and I had no editorial control over the final result, which you just saw. We gave all of our we gave it all to Jennifer. You cut the film the way you want. So when we saw it at Sundance this year, it was the first time we ever saw the completed film. And why George and I love it so much is because we feel it shows a couple with all of our pluses and minuses, and it shows the truth about our relationship. If it had been a vanity project and we'd had final cut approval, there's a lot of scenes in that film you just saw that I would have cut. But ultimately, we feel that this film might reach, because it's funny, it's a romantic comedy, we think it might reach millions of Americans, and we hope that objective, fair-minded Americans will see a same-sex couple, George and Brad, and not want to discriminate against us. And that's why I don't mind the film.
You notice he cleverly avoided her question.
I am willing to move on. It's interesting that at one point you decided to run for office. Do you think that if you had won, you would have given up acting and gone into political service? Because you seem to be an educator, you seem like you want to, help people, help the community, reach out. Do you think that that would have been a possibility for you to give up acting and become an elected official?
That's what they call an iffy question, because it didn't happen that way. I'm glad that it did happen that way, because I've been a political activist for many years up to that time. But I was just seen as a good, enthusiastic, committed volunteer. But after that run, I had some credibility as a political activist, and politicians listened to me more seriously. But at the same time, I had my acting career, both. So I had the best of two possible worlds. But to go with your if question, if I had won, and then become a city council member of the City Council of Los Angeles. An area that I was interested in is public transportation, to which Mayor Bradley appointed me after that fact. I would have been very active in that, and I think that would have been fun, because public transportation is essential to bind a city or a community or an area, a region, together, brings people together. It gets people together with their job, gives them access to other parts of the city. People in the barrios or the black neighborhood could have access to the beach, something that many have never had the chance to get to. So that would have been an issue that I would have taken on. As it turned out, the mayor did appoint me to the board of the Southern California Rapid Transit District, and I was able to both work on public transportation policy and issues, and at the same time have my career. And that's when Star Trek came back as a series of movies. So the best of two possible worlds.
So what do you think about the new crop of Star Trek movies?
The rebooted cast, I think they're terrific. Okay. And some of them capture the original actors' not only performance, but body language. Carl Urban, who plays Dr. McCoy, has McCoy's speech pattern, his rhythm, and his speech. I think he's doing a wonderful job. And Chris Pine is a dashing, good-looking guy. But there is a difference, because Gene Roddenberry, who created Star Trek, used science fiction as a metaphor for contemporary issues. We dealt with the civil rights movement that was going on at that time. We dealt with the Vietnam War. I did a guest shot on women's rights. Just a few days ago, I did a quick guest shot on Stephen Colbert's show, urging people to vote. And they showed a segment of Armageddon, which was a commentary on the Vietnam War. So we dealt with contemporary issues disguised as science fiction. The rebooted Star Trek is great sci-fi action adventure, but you don't have that additional dimension there. That's the thing that I think is missing from
Social commentary.
J.J. Abrams' version.
I know that you always wanted to be a Star Trek commander, to be a captain, and in the last film you were. Are there other roles that you feel like, gee, you missed out on? That you is it Shakespeare? Is it, you know, Ibsen? Are there other roles that you wish you had done?
I love Shakespeare, and I've done Shakespeare in workshop. I've done Shakespeare in small productions. I did Macbeth at the Inner City Cultural Center. I've played Cassius in Julius Caesar. I think I'm past the time to play Hamlet. And King Lear is fast approaching.
Yeah. All right, they're letting me know that we have just about 5 minutes left. Both of you, a question to both of you. Regrets and greatest triumphs, do you feel?
I can speak for Brad on his greatest triumph. What I learned from the documentary not to do is there's that shot of me walking through the pedestrian traffic of New York City going to rehearsal, and I start singing one of the anthemic songs from Allegiance. I'm carrying my rehearsal stuff, and I'm walking at the New York pace, and I really am sorry I started singing because I didn't think she would film it, and she did. She didn't catch me at my best singing.
It sounds like you have no regrets. That's your only one.
Only one.
Only one.
No, you learn from life, and some of the negative areas I also value because I've learned from it. It's made me stronger, and I think I'm a better person for it.
And to piggyback on that, I gotta say that the philosophy that George has a very optimistic philosophy about life, and I'm basically a very pessimistic person. But to everybody in this audience, I've been with George, he's been my life partner for 27 years, we've been legally married as husband and husband for 6 years. And that's what I'd say to your question about triumphs, like shocking things in my life, is that in the 1980s, I was here are we in the hamlet of Somerville or the city of Somerville? And is this where Somerville Lumber is located? Is it still around? Oh, I used to be a reporter for National Home Center News, and I came here and took photos at Somerville Lumber, never dreaming that in the year 2014 I'd be on stage with you talking about my life in this detail. So life is strange, everybody. It might happen to you.
He later went on to become the West Coast editor of a financial newsletter, Bond Buyer. That was my hubby.
Also, I think a lot of people want to know about Allegiance, which, as you saw in the film, is a musical that George wrote about.
I did not write it.
Well,
I inspired it. I guided them. I gave them specifics.
Give it a muse. It's actually
It's
coming
written
to
by, well, the composer-lyricist is J. Quo.
Right.
I've been telling people, every period in American musical theater has been defined by one great musician, Cole Porter, or Rodgers and Hammerstein, or now it's Stephen Sondheim. Well, wait for the period of J. Quo, which begins with Allegiance.
Exactly. But I understand it's coming to New York.
We're going to open on Broadway in 2015. And thank you very much for that enthusiastic applause. We opened first. We called it the world premiere of Allegiance, but the New York people still keep calling it the out-of-town tryout. Arrogance of New Yorkers. We opened at the very well-respected regional theater, the Old Globe Theater. And when we opened, from the very performance on, we were sold out. And we had to turn away people. And because the whole run was a turn-away run, the Old Globe Theater did something that they rarely do. They gave us an extension of a week to accommodate some of the people that couldn't see it. And even with that week, we had to turn people away. And so now, in preparing for the Broadway opening, it's illegal. We don't have a specific theater yet. So we can't sell tickets until you have a certain theater. And however, our producer, Lorenzo Tioni, came up with a great inspired idea. I think it's a landmark in American theater. He came up with the idea of a priority access pass, where for $5, before tickets go on sale to the public, you have access to a pair of seats any day of the week, any section of the theater, any performance, matinee or evening, and you can have first dibs on those 2 seats before the general public can get their seats. And for, particularly for those people who are going to be coming into New York for a certain specific time, you know, a week or maybe even just 3 days, you want to be assured that you will have your opportunity to see Allegiance and not be turned away as we had to in San Diego. So if you get your priority access pass, you can be absolutely assured that you have your seats even before it opens. Go to allegiancemusical.com and get your priority access pass. I'm a television actor and I can't resist the commercial break.
I couldn't have said it better myself. I want to thank you both for sharing your lives with us. Ladies and gentlemen, George and Brad.